He never asked for thanks, never stood in the spotlight. For 12 years, he just showed up. Same boots, same silence, same route. But one morning, a young recruit noticed something no one else had. A faded tattoo hidden under a rolled sleeve. In that moment, everything changed. What began as a routine bus ride became a quiet revelation. A lesson in humility, honor, and the kind of heroism that doesn't seek recognition. This is not just a story about a man who once served. It's about how he kept serving, in silence, long after the war ended. And the legacy he left behind, rolled on four wheels at 5:25 every morning. The line shuffled forward sluggishly, each person consumed with their morning thoughts, until an impatient voice sliced through the air. "Move it, old man. Some of us have places to be." The words came sharp, rude, echoing from the back of the line. The speaker, young and brash, pushed forward with the hurried entitlement of someone too green to know better. But the old man at the front didn't even turn around. Frank Malone, the bus driver, simply continued wiping down the side mirror of bus narrower 417. Same motion, same cloth, same quiet ritual he'd performed every single morning for nearly 12 years. His hand moved with practiced calm, slow, and precise, as if time itself didn't have the power to rush him. He wore the same thick-soled black boots, the same faded navy windbreaker. Spoke just as little as always. There was a kind of quiet gravity to the way he moved, unbothered, unwavering. But this morning someone noticed. As the young man stepped onto the bus, a Navy recruit paused mid-step. The sunlight hit just right through the windshield, and something on the driver's forearm caught his eye, partially visible under the rolled sleeve of that old windbreaker. A faded tattoo, time-worn but unmistakable. An anchor, an eagle, and the Navy SEAL trident etched in permanent ink, half-hidden, but impossible to miss for someone who recognized what it meant. The recruit's spine straightened instantly. His voice dropped, almost reverent. "Sir." And in that moment, the entire bus seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped. Even the shuffling of bodies and rustling of jackets ceased. Silence, thick and sudden, settled like mist. Each dawn, just before the first light broke over the Gulf, Frank pulled into the Leopard Street depot without fail. No alarm clock needed. His body still woke with the discipline of years gone by, long after he'd left the service. His routines were etched into him. Black coffee, no sugar, shirt tucked tight, boots polished to a dull shine. There were no passengers yet, but he still checked every mirror, every latch. 5:25 a.m. sharp, bus 417 always rolled out. Rain, blazing heat, tropical storm watch, it made no difference. I hardly get from the Marina District to the perimeter of the naval base and looping back through downtown Corpus Christi. He kept his route tight and efficient. His driving rhythm was so dependable that it felt like part of the city itself. Seasoned riders found comfort in it. New ones found it strangely unsettling. He didn't chat, didn't trade jokes, or join the depot gossip. A nod was all you got. A tap on the mirror, a steady glance in the rear view. You didn't need to hear him to know he was there. The other drivers had plenty of theories about him. Most agreed he was probably ex-Navy, maybe a lifer who never quite turned off the switch. Some joked he was on autopilot, like he had a chip in his brain. Others figured he was just a quiet old vet living out the rest of his days in routine. He wore that Navy windbreaker year-round, even when the temperatures climbed. And his boots, they didn't match company dress code at all. Jet black, solid, looked like they weighed 10 pounds each. He never took them off. They looked built for something more than a city bus. Nobody ever asked. Every so often he'd roll up just one sleeve, always the left, just below the elbow. Some said it was arthritis. Some thought he was just cooling off. But no one had ever seen him roll up the other. Frank wasn't a smiler, but he wasn't cold. There was something composed about him, like a body of water left undisturbed for years. Still and quiet on the surface, but deep and full of things unseen. People who rode his route daily respected that. They didn't need words. The same faces showed up each morning. A nurse heading to the Crispone Center. A widow with her husband's urn tucked gently into her handbag. A high school janitor who whispered a soft, "Morning, Mr. Malone," as he stepped up the stairs. Frank never corrected them, never said, "It's just Frank," never told them he didn't care much for titles like Sir. He just nodded once and drove. Nobody could remember him being late. Not once. Not even during the deep freeze 4 years back, when the overpasses iced over and the city nearly shut down. He still showed up, boots crusted in salt, thermos in hand, checking his mirrors like nothing in the world had changed. To most people, Frank Malone was just a tired old man with a steady job and a good work ethic. But to those who paid close attention, those with trained eyes, there was something else. The way he checked intersections before switching lanes. The way he braced gently before making a tight turn. How he scanned all three mirrors, not once, but twice at every single stop. None of it was random, it was quiet vigilance. And for someone like Eli Navarro, a young Navy recruit barely out of orientation, those little things were impossible to ignore. It was a Tuesday morning when Eli boarded bus 417. Just 19, still getting used to the weight of his new boots and the feel of starch in his uniform. His posture, though, was sharper than most. His sleeves crisp, the fresh scent of regulation issue fabric clinging to him. He hadn't yet learned how to relax in public, still ran through silent checklists in his head out of habit. When he stepped up to the fare box and his eyes landed on that faded tattoo beneath the rolled sleeve, something changed, he knew. He didn't speak at first, he just watched. Because the man at the wheel wasn't just a bus driver, he was someone who had once carried weight most would never understand. And now Eli understood exactly who he was riding with. Stiff folds still clung to the edges of his uniform, the kind of starch that hadn't yet been broken in. He was polite, soft-spoken, and alert, knew enough not to carry the weight of rank, but already bearing the marks of respect in how he listened, how he moved. Eli Navarro was stationed at the Naval Air Station for basic systems training. Everything was still unfamiliar. The routines, the orders, the way time felt slower and heavier. Like most of the new recruits, he'd been instructed to take the 5:45 a.m. bus from North Beach. And like everyone else, he boarded that morning with zero expectations for the man behind the wheel. But something caught his eye, something most others missed entirely. It wasn't the boots, though those stood out. They were laced tight in a pattern Eli recognized immediately. Military issue down to the wear on the heels, definitely not transit standard. It wasn't the way the driver watched the mirrors either, though there was something in that too. A practice sweep that felt more like recon than traffic checking. It was his arm. The driver's left sleeve had been rolled up just past the elbow, exposing a rough stretch of skin, aged, sun-darkened, but strong. And there, half hidden but unmistakable, ink, a tattoo. At first, Eli figured it was just another old mark, something from youth, meaningless. But he'd been studying, memorizing. In those briefings, they drilled the emblems and symbols into them like scripture. Brotherhoods, divisions, elite insignias, each carved into memory like code. And this one was not for show. A trident, worn but proud, an eagle poised in mid-flight, wings spread wide. Beneath it, the anchor, the sidearm, the unmistakable seal, etched into flesh, not for decoration, but for identification. Eli froze halfway up the steps, his boots making a soft thud against the rubber mat. The driver gave no indication he'd noticed, or maybe he had and chose not to react. Just a small nod, eyes to the mirror, and the soft grind of gears as the bus began to move. Eli slid into a seat near the front, heart pounding. Had he really seen what he thought he had? The shapes were still sharp in his mind. No, that wasn't a random tattoo. That was earned. That was worn by a very specific kind of man. The ride continued quietly, like any other early morning. The usual stops, the muted shuffling of half-awake passengers. No one spoke much, not even Frank. Eli didn't either. He spent the whole ride sneaking discreet glances, respectful, measured, trying to figure out the man at the wheel. There was his posture, straight-backed, never relaxed. He didn't lean, his shoulders never dropped. Every time a passenger got on, his eyes flicked to them. Not in suspicion, but in evaluation, like he was still reading threat levels. Like his instincts had never stood down. Like nothing in him had ever truly retired. When Eli reached his stop at the base, he paused. He wanted to say something, anything, ask a question, acknowledge what he'd seen. But something in the man's stillness told him to wait. Instead, as he stepped off, he simply murmured, "Thank you, sir." The driver's eyes met his in the mirror. A half second, no smile, no nod, but he had heard. The next day, Eli made sure to sit in the same spot, this time on purpose. The morning sun slanted differently through the windows, hitting just right, and there it was again. The tattoo. The same symbols, weathered but proud. At the next stop, once the front of the bus had mostly emptied, Eli leaned slightly forward. He kept his voice low, measured. "Sir, were you?" The question never needed to be finished. "I was." 2 words, that was all. And just like that, Eli Navarro understood. This man wasn't just a driver. He was a ghost from another life, a figure born from silence and duty, a warrior hidden in plain sight. By noon that day, Eli couldn't concentrate. The base buzzed with its usual cadence, drills, debriefs, instructors barking through routines. But Eli's mind was back on that bus, on the voice, on the ink, on the weight behind those 2 words. During a short break, he pulled aside Petty Officer Vance, one of the old hands at the station. 24 years of service had carved themselves into Vance's face, into the scars he wore like memories. "Sir," Eli began carefully, "do you know if Frank Malone drives bus 417 onto base every morning?" Vance squinted at him. "Malone? Yeah, quiet guy. Drives the route in, doesn't talk much." "He has the trident," Eli said, lowering his voice. "Faded left forearm. I asked if he was, and he said, I was." Vance's entire demeanor shifted. The easygoing manner dropped instantly. His voice went low. "You sure?" Eli nodded. "I'd bet my uniform on it." Vance didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted past Eli, like looking for something far off. Then he muttered almost to himself, "No way." But within a few short hours, the hallways began to buzz. Quiet whispers weaving through the chow lines, between lockers and barracks, passed like old secrets coming back to life. At first, nobody believed it. "You mean the guy with the ball cap and the windbreaker?" someone asked with a smirk. "Nah, can't be." But then someone else confirmed it. A grizzled logistics chief, retired now, who'd seen the same tattoo back in 2019. Another chimed in, recalling a half-forgotten tale from cold weather training, something that had passed through whispered circles like folklore, a SEAL mission in Panama, 1989. 6 teams cornered. The extraction had failed. Mission command had gone dark, and somehow every single one of them had made it out. No air support, no medevac, no backup, just silence and survival. All that was left behind were murmurs in the after-action reports. A name. Griggs? No. Granger? Memory blurred, but the impact remained. Then someone on a Navy forum uncovered a redacted article buried in an old Navy Times archive. One line pierced through. Master Chief Frank Malone, SEAL Team 3, awarded Bronze Star with Valor. Mission details classified. Word spread quickly, farther than anyone expected. A retired SEAL instructor from Kingsville texted an active duty friend. "You hear about the bus driver down in Corpus?" "Yeah, Frank Malone. Thought he was dead." "Nope," the reply came. "Just done." By the end of the week, the story had swept through the barracks like a tide pulled by something larger than rumor. The man who had once led Black Ops through Central America, who had dragged a whole fire team out under sniper fire with a shattered femur, was now driving a city bus around the Marina Loop. Every morning, he'd roll up his left sleeve just enough to leave the tattoo visible below the elbow. Not to flaunt it, but so those who knew might recognize it. Then one morning, everything shifted. The bus arrived as usual, on time, precise, routine. Frank checked his mirrors like he always did, his expression calm, unreadable. At the 3rd stop past the pier, a tall figure boarded, not a sailor in fatigues. This one wore full dress blues, polished to perfection. Rows of ribbons stretched across his chest like a history book come to life. A silver seal trident caught the morning light beneath the nameplate. CMDR J. Westfield. The entire bus seemed to freeze. Frank didn't flinch. He looked up through the rearview mirror, eyes meeting the new arrival's reflection. "Morning," the commander said, voice calm, but with an unmistakable weight behind it. "Permission to ride?" Frank's hand never left the wheel. His eyes didn't waver. "You got a seat, Commander." That was all. Nobody else spoke. The younger sailors aboard suddenly sat straighter, their spines stiff with instinct. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they could feel it. Something sacred was unfolding. When the bus rolled to a stop by the naval station, Commander Westfield didn't rise right away. He stood just behind Frank's seat, close but respectful, and leaned in slightly. His voice dropped to just above a whisper. "I reviewed the records," he said. "You're the one from Operation Marlin." Frank exhaled slowly, the breath of a man who'd long buried that name. "That man's gone. Long time now." "With all due respect, sir," Westfield replied, voice even but firm, "some legacies don't die. They just change uniforms." Without another word, the commander stepped off. Frank said nothing. He just checked the mirror again, eyes scanning the route ahead. There was still ground to cover. By Monday, something had changed. Not the bus. Bus 417 was still the same old city coach, its vinyl seats scuffed, its handrails worn and dull. But the way people treated the ride had shifted. It began in silence. Young sailors and Marines began arriving early, 10, sometimes 15 minutes before departure. No phones, no earbuds, no idle chatter. Just a quiet, almost reverent stillness at the stop. They formed neat rows, not because anyone ordered it, but because it felt right. When Frank Malone pulled up, on time like clockwork, they boarded silently. No one said good morning or thank you. Just a subtle nod, a small, ceremonial dip of the head, an acknowledgement of something bigger than any of them could name. Frank didn't change a thing, didn't acknowledge the shift, didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't roll his sleeve higher. He just drove. But they noticed. They saw how he never missed a stop, how each brake was smooth, each mirror check exact, how he never once had to double-check a street name, not even during a detour. One morning, a young recruit quietly pulled out a napkin from his pack and wiped a coffee stain off the window. The next day, 2 others picked up discarded water bottles. By the week's end, not a single bottle rolled on the floor of the buses anymore. The vehicle gleamed, cleaner than any other in the entire fleet. No one had been assigned to clean it. No schedule was posted. No orders were given. And yet, it happened. Silently, naturally. A handful of passengers, mostly civilians, began to take note. Some glanced around, puzzled by the quietly disciplined group of military men sitting upright with practiced posture. Others, perhaps jaded or impatient, rolled their eyes when uniformed passengers rose to offer seats to older women or bent to pick up fallen bags without hesitation. But not everyone understood what they were witnessing. One humid Thursday afternoon, something snapped the rhythm. The bus, half full at the time, held a mix of base-bound service members and a few off-duty civilians. A teenage boy climbed aboard, headphones on full blast, music thumping, cap worn backwards, oversized hoodie dangling off one shoulder. He slumped into a seat midway down the aisle, legs stretched arrogantly across, his phone still blaring. As the bus rumbled down Ocean Drive, he threw a glance toward the driver and snorted. "Yo, Grandpa, can't this thing move any faster? I got places to be, man." A couple of heads turned. There were no gaffes, no murmurs, just silence. Frank, as always, kept his eyes forward, both hands on the wheel. Steady, unshaken, silent. But that day, Eli Navarre was seated toward the back. It had been 3 months since he started training. 3 months that had molded him, tempered his voice, sharpened his posture. He had grown quieter, stronger. Hearing the boy's comment, he lifted his head slowly. He removed one earbud, turned in his seat. His voice was even, calm, controlled. "Watch your tone." That was all. No raised voice, no anger, just a line carved with purpose. The teenager blinked. Eli didn't repeat himself. Then, with a steadiness that cut through the noise like a scalpel, he added, "That man bled so you could run your mouth on a public bus. So maybe sit up, shut your music off, and learn a little something about respect." The boy's face lost all color. His fingers scrambled for his phone. The music stopped mid-beat. His gaze dropped to the floor. Still no one else spoke. The bus remained blanketed in stillness. Frank didn't turn around, didn't utter a single word. But in the mirror, Eli caught a flicker in the older man's eyes. Not gratitude. Frank had never been a man who sought applause. But there was something else there, something barely visible. Approval, maybe. Recognition. From that day forward, it was as if the entire route had shifted. Civilians who once stepped off without a glance began nodding in quiet respect. City employees lifted their hats. Older veterans, catching sight of Frank at the wheel, stood a little taller, as though remembering the man from another time, another war. And Eli, he began writing after every ride, just small reflections, a few lines. What he noticed, what changed, not just about Frank, but about discipline, how it could shape a space, how it could turn a simple commute into something more. The bus was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a quiet monument, a tribute to a man who never asked for one. By the second month, word spread beyond the base. It started subtly, a passing mention in a local VFW newsletter, a whisper in the break room at City Hall in Corpus Christi. Then came the photo. Someone had snapped a blurry cell phone shot, bus number 419 in the cool blue of early morning. A single line of uniformed recruits boarding, heads bowed, in perfect silence. The caption was simple. There's a legend driving this route. SEALs ride it like it's sacred ground. Within hours, the post went viral. Hundreds of shares. Comments began pouring in. I rode with him and 93 of the quietest men I ever met. Is this real? Who is he? Curiosity turned to investigation. Local reporters started sniffing around. Then one morning, a young journalist from Channel 7 News showed up at the depot, clipboard in hand, camera crew in tow. She stood quietly near Frank's bus, waiting as he completed his usual pre-trip inspection. He moved from tire to mirror to panel, methodical and focused, like always. Her smile was bright, too bright, rehearsed. Mr. Malone, she began, I'm with the local news. We'd love to do a piece about your military background and the incredible influence you're having here. Frank didn't even look up. No interviews, he said plainly, reaching for the latch on the side panel. Sir, I really think a lot of young people could benefit from your story, especially those currently in uniform. This time Frank turned, met her gaze. It's not my story they need. His tone was firm but not cold. There was no anger, just a clear, immovable boundary. He didn't elaborate. He simply closed the panel and moved on. 5 minutes later, she left, her clipboard untouched, her camera unused. Her cameraman shook his head with a quiet smile. Admiration, maybe. Respect. That interview never aired. But the story? It kept moving, quietly, steadily, like the man himself. Frank never spoke about that part of his life, not directly anyway. But his silence had always said enough. When the idea came up at City Hall to name the transit center after him, it wasn't Frank who suggested it. It came from someone else, a quiet suggestion in a staff meeting. A councilman whose daughter was currently stationed at the naval base took it further. He offered to make it official, said he'd handle the paperwork, the dedication, everything. But Frank declined, calmly, firmly. No names, no ceremonies. He didn't want a monument, didn't want attention. That wasn't his way. Still, some things move forward on their own. One foggy Friday morning, just before the 5:45 a.m. departure, a small group assembled near Frank's regular stop at the North Beach Loop. There were city workers in orange safety vests, a Navy officer in full-dress uniform, a few veterans standing in solemn silence, and a couple of civilians who had heard what was happening. Off to the side stood two older men holding a covered bronze plaque between them. There was no speech, no ribbon to cut, no announcements or formalities. They simply approached the bus shelter, fastened the plaque into place beside the glass wall, brushed the dust from its edge, and stepped back with a quiet nod. The plaque was modest, no image, no colors, no flourish. Just a few simple engraved words that spoke louder than any ceremony. For those who serve in silence, in honor of Frank Malone and every warrior who never needed applause. Frank saw it later that same morning during one of his routine stops. He didn't slow down, didn't trace it with his hand, but he stood taller as he pulled the bus away from the curb, just slightly. Subtle but visible to those who'd learned to watch him closely. A few of his regulars noticed the change, how he straightened his shoulders. That was his way of saying, thank you. Nothing more, nothing less. Tourists snapped pictures of the plaque over the next week. One photo made it onto a military-themed subreddit. A Navy veteran shared it on LinkedIn, reflecting on the quiet strength behind the gesture. The post was picked up by a national nonprofit supporting veterans, and it began to circulate. Soon people were talking about the humble bus driver from Corpus Christi on military bases from San Diego to Norfolk. But Frank, he didn't change a thing. Same boots, same windbreaker, same silent presence, same route. He wasn't chasing recognition. He didn't correct the stories or offer details. He didn't give speeches or show up at events. He just kept doing his job with quiet, steady honor. And somehow that made the respect deepen, because people saw what he represented. A reminder that heroism doesn't always come wrapped in medals and parades. Sometimes it shows up before dawn, wearing a transit badge and carrying a cloth to wipe the mirrors clean. The city never renamed the depot. His name wasn't emblazoned across banners, no statue, no billboard. But the bus, old number 416, meant something different now, especially to those in uniform. It wasn't just a commute anymore. It was a kind of quiet shrine, a place where people stood a little taller because the man behind the wheel showed them how. Then came a Monday when Frank didn't show up. For the first time in 12 years, bus 417 rolled into the depot with someone else in the driver's seat. No announcement, no warning, just absence. No scribbled note on the transit board, no update from dispatch. The replacement driver was young, courteous, did everything by the book. But the difference was immediate, not dramatic, but you felt it, the way the brakes sounded different. How the stops were just a little off. The mirrors weren't adjusted with the same precise care. And the silence, the bus always had silence. But this was different. It wasn't calm or reverent now. It felt empty, like everyone was waiting for something that wasn't coming back. Service members who had come to treat 417 as sacred ground sat quietly, watching, looking at the seat, the mirrors, the dashboard, searching for signs of the man who made this ordinary route feel like something more. Still no Frank on Tuesday. Then Wednesday. Whispers began, soft and speculative. Maybe he finally took a vacation. Maybe he retired, quietly, just like he lived. But no one said the thing they were really thinking, that maybe the old warrior had made his final trip. Then came Thursday. At exactly 5:25 a.m., right on schedule, bus 417 pulled into the depot. And behind the wheel, calm, composed, and as if he'd never left, sat Frank Malone. Same boots, same windbreaker, same steady hands on the wheel. But something had changed. Behind his seat, secured with gentle care, sat a triangular wooden display case. Inside it, a perfectly folded American flag, the kind that's only handed out once, the kind that never returns with the soldier who earned it. Frank said nothing. He didn't draw attention to it. But every passenger who stepped onto that bus that morning saw it, and every single one understood. Someone close to Frank, someone from the life he never spoke about, was gone. And that flag was the only thing they could bring back. The seat where someone should have been was empty. Maybe it had belonged to a teammate, maybe to a brother in arms. Maybe he was the last living soul from an old unit long faded into memory. No one asked. No one needed to. There was a knowing in the silence that swept through the bus that morning, a silence unlike anything before. It didn't just feel respectful. It felt sacred. The air seemed thicker somehow, like it was holding its breath with everyone else. The usual hum of the engine was hushed, the rubber whisper of tires on asphalt oddly faint, like the outside world had slowed to a stillness just for this ride. No one reached for their phone. No one dared speak. At the rear of the bus, Eli Navarro sat quietly, his cap held against his chest with both hands, reverent and still. Others mirrored him, civilians and veterans alike. A nurse near the front placed a hand gently over her heart. A teenage boy pulled off his headphones and held them in his lap, his gaze downcast. Even the construction worker, who always nodded off during the route, stayed wide awake today, eyes fixed out the window, jaw locked tight. No announcements were made, no words spoken, yet somehow everyone just knew. Grief doesn't need a translator, it speaks for itself. And on that morning, every soul aboard was fluent. Frank drove the way he always did, checking mirrors, shifting gears, making turns. But each motion carried a little more intention, like he was aware of the weight of the moment and didn't want to rush it. Every stop was met with quiet steps and soft murmurs. Each new passenger stepped on, saw the flag gently draped behind the seat, and instinctively lowered their voice. No one needed to be told. No one addressed Frank directly, all but one. Just before reaching the base, Eli paused at the front of the bus. He turned slightly and, in a voice barely more than a breath, said, "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." Frank didn't speak. He didn't have to. In the mirror, he met Eli's eyes just for a moment, and it was enough. It said everything. For the next few days, the flag stayed exactly where it was, behind the driver's seat, untouched, polished, and honored in silence. No one brought it up at the depot. No announcements were made. No group emails or formal notices. But everyone knew, and every driver gave Frank room, a kind of invisible space no one dared to intrude upon. The mechanics, they checked bus 417 twice over before Frank arrived, and his parking spot, no one came near it. The truth, though unspoken, settled like morning fog. Frank had buried someone. And yet, here he was, back on the road, showing up like always, steady, silent, present. In that quiet act, he showed every young man and woman in uniform watching that strength isn't found only in medals or battlefield victories. Sometimes it's found in the quiet courage of showing up again the next day, even when the flag behind you weighs more than your hands, even when your heart carries more than you can bear. Frank Malone never needed to give a speech. That week, without a single word, he said more than most men ever do in a lifetime. When the official retirement memo came from the Transit Authority, it was simple. One paragraph, no bold letters, no party notice. Operator Frank Malone to retire effective Friday. Final route on bus 417. That was it. Just a line on a clipboard to most. But to those who rode with him, those who knew what silence he carried, it marked the end of something that had meant far more than words could say. And they weren't about to let it fade unnoticed. Friday arrived cool and early. Mist hung over the street signs like a curtain, and the stillness in the depot yard felt ceremonial. At exactly 5:25 a.m., bus 417 pulled out of the garage for the last time. Frank Malone sat at the wheel, same boots, same rolled sleeves, same still determined stare. But today he wasn't alone. He could feel it, in the weight of the morning, in the ache behind his ribs, in the hum of the engine. As the bus turned onto the outbound lane, the yard opened up into view. And there they were, two lines shoulder to shoulder, stretching from the garage doors all the way to the far curb. Over 40 men and women, some still serving, others recently discharged. No dress uniforms, no ribbons. Just worn jeans, old boots, weathered polos, jackets with frayed collars. But every back stood straight, every chin lifted. No one waved, no one clapped. They simply stood, silent, unmoving, as the bus passed slowly by. Some held their caps to their hearts. Others stood empty-handed, but their presence spoke more loudly than any tribute ever could. Frank didn't slow down. He didn't need to. He kept driving, his face unreadable, but his hands clutched the wheel tighter than usual, and in the rearview mirror, his eyes lingered, just for a second longer than they had in years. The route that morning was different. Not a single seat was taken by the usual crowd. No sleepy students, no early commuters, no tired tourists. Each seat was filled by someone who'd worn the uniform. Some had gray in their hair, others still carried the stiffness of recent training. But all of them rode in quiet solidarity, carried by a man who had given everything and still kept showing up. They came from different walks of life, some with gray streaks in their hair, others still bearing the unshakable imprints of war on their faces. A few wrote quietly in notebooks, while others nodded at each other with silent understanding, tied together by something deeper than any uniform or insignia, could ever show. There was no chatter, no laughter, just the sound of the road and the hush of shared memory. No one looked at their phone. No one broke the silence. It was perhaps the quietest ride the city of Corpus Christi had ever known. When the bus finally pulled into its last stop at the depot, something unexpected awaited them. Normally, the buses would be parked haphazardly, lined up along the edge of the lot or waiting for service in nearby bays. But today, the entire fleet had been arranged deliberately, forming a wide V shape around a new stone monument placed at the center of the yard. It was a slab of gray granite, unpolished, unembellished, and at its base, etched with purposeful simplicity, were just 10 words. Heroes don't announce themselves. They drive the route every day. Frank stared at the monument for a moment, unreadable. Then, without a word, he shut off the engine, released the brake, and rose from his seat. He reached behind for a worn duffel bag, the same one he had brought along every shift without fail, and swung it over his shoulder. Heading for the door, his steps were unhurried, steady. Waiting at the bottom of the steps was Eli Navarro. But he wasn't the same Eli from before, not the fresh recruit with uncertain hands. Now he wore pressed khakis and a navy windbreaker, a faint glint of silver insignia catching the light at his collar. Time had broadened his shoulders, solidified his bearing. Still, his eyes carried the same sharp intensity they held on that very first morning. "Need a ride, Commander?" he asked with a quiet smile, gesturing toward a navy blue pickup parked nearby. Frank didn't answer immediately. His face gave away nothing. Then, just the faintest of nods. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant." They walked together toward the truck, silent as before. Behind them, the passengers who had ridden the route disembarked and quietly formed two lines along the path. No commands given, no cues needed. As Frank walked between them, no one saluted, no one spoke. But every single one stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes forward, honoring him not with words, but with presence. A final formation, just for him. When Frank settled into the passenger seat of the truck, he glanced at the dashboard. There, resting in plain view, was a single polished challenge coin. On one side, the insignia of SEAL Team 3. On the reverse, an inscription, "For those who never stop serving." There was no name attached, but Eli knew exactly who had left it. Senator James H. Morrison, former SEAL, former chairman of the Armed Services Committee, had quietly ridden Bus 417 once, months before. He had said nothing, and he hadn't needed to. Frank picked up the coin, rolled it between his fingers, then gently placed it back. Still, he said nothing. The engine hummed to life and the truck pulled away from the depot, disappearing into the soft blue of early morning. Later that same afternoon, a grainy black and white photograph appeared in a military newsletter. It showed Frank Malone walking away from the bus, duffel over his shoulder, while 40 service members stood silently in formation behind him. The caption beneath it read, "Commander Frank Malone, SEAL, mentor, driver, legend, no speeches needed." From that day on, across naval bases stretching from coast to coast, new recruits would hear his name. Not shouted, not displayed on plaques, but spoken in quiet tones like a story passed from soldier to soldier. A lesson in how to carry oneself. Because true honor never needs volume. It only needs someone who shows up every single morning and drives the route. In today's world, where attention spans fade in seconds and recognition is measured in clicks, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones. The ones who don't ask for applause. The ones who simply keep showing up. Frank Malone was one of them. He never wanted a ceremony, never gave a speech. He didn't even tell his whole story. But in the simple rhythm of service and silent discipline, he taught something rare and vital to an entire generation of service members, and perhaps to the whole town. He showed them that real strength doesn't need a spotlight. It's steady, it's consistent, it's humble. And now, more than ever, the world needs that kind of strength. You don't need to wear a uniform to follow Frank's example. Maybe you're the one who checks in on your neighbor, even when you're tired. Maybe you're the grandparent who never misses a game, no matter the weather. Maybe you're the store clerk who always remembers someone's name, their story, their birthday. In a culture where it's easier to speak than to listen, to perform rather than serve, Frank reminded us of something simple but profound. Greatness isn't measured in moments. it's measured in mornings. So now we ask you, who is the Frank Malone in your life? Have you known someone who carried life's burdens quietly, asking for nothing in return? Were you raised by someone like that? Or maybe you are that someone. Leave a comment and share your story. We want to hear it on too. And if this story moved you, if it made you sit a little taller, think a little deeper, please give it a like. Share it with someone who would understand and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for being here. And wherever you are, whatever you do, remember, excellence doesn't shout, it just shows up. Before dawn,